adoption of solutions, standards, and best practices for greater overall security. We commend the Congress for its early focus in this session on cybersecurity issues and to the subcommittee for convening this panel today, and we look forward to working with you. Again, thank you for the opportunity to appear today and express industry's perspective. I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much. I'm going to throw out a question. I'd like all the panelists to take part. And it's similar to the one that I offered our first panel. How have the changes in technologies such as the network architecture and the use of wireless devices and networks changed the approach that is needed for federal cybersecurity? And let me go on with the next one. Senator Rockefeller and Snowe recently introduced legislation that included provisions to establish a cybersecurity office in the White House, along with federal acquisition and procurement requirements for IT. And these recommendations are also offered in the recent CSIS report for the new administration. And I would welcome to hear from anyone that would like to address it first.
I guess I'll hit it off first. With regard to wireless security, increasingly the federal government is using that technology. And we did a report back in 2005, I believe, which identified that federal agencies had not taken sufficient steps to adequately secure the use of wireless security. Obviously, there are some tremendous benefits that can accrue from using such technologies. It provides greater mobility and the opportunities for individuals to perform services that they normally would not be able to do if they were tethered to a workstation at their desk. And so clearly there are some benefits in using such technologies, but with the introduction of these type of technologies into the workplace, agencies need to assess the risk associated with those technologies and then take appropriate steps to mitigate those risks. In our review, we found that they had not adequately done that. In many cases, they had not identified the types of vulnerabilities that such technologies would place and did not provide sufficient policies or procedures in place to mitigate those vulnerabilities, and did not take sufficient steps to train their staff on how to appropriately and securely use these type of technologies. So with the introduction of any new technologies, I would just say, that there are some basic steps that need to occur in order to facilitate their secure use.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. One of the things that we looked at in some of our work was, who are the architects of the federal government? And if you start looking at it a little bit, you find out it's people named Grover Cleveland and Herbert Hoover, which is, good, but it's maybe time to modernize how government operates a little bit. And the question is, how do we do that? One way to do that is to take advantage of the technologies you described, but as my colleague from GAO has said, when we take advantage of them, and we absolutely have to, we also have to think about security. And usually what happens is we do one and we don't do the other, and then we're surprised. So I think essential to modernize, but need to do it in a secure fashion.
Thank you. I think we're talking mostly technology, so we'll get to Senator Rockefeller's bill in a moment. Technology, of course, is something that our country has been a leader in since we started, and there's no turning back there. The employees of the federal government are just like you and me and our kids and our grandparents and people that are around us. We have most of these technologies at home. We want to bring them into work. The private sector has the same problem. So when new things come along, such as wireless or handhelds or even new applications like the social networking sites, Twitter, Facebook, things like that, there's naturally this desire to bring that back into the workspace, which could be the federal government or could be the private sector. And we want to do the same thing at work as what we do at home. It's a natural desire. Even with our cars, we would like to use that as the way to get around and not depend on having a office provided or government provided vehicle that we have to wait in line for a motor pool to have it available. So our challenge then is, as new technologies come along, as Mr. Lewis said, we have a unique situation with the federal government. That's the security of very sensitive information, the crown jewels of our nation. These technologies make those crown jewels now exposed, not just to local people, but the entire planet. This we've not faced before. Our adversaries can get into our hard drives remotely in a matter of milliseconds from virtually anywhere on the planet. And when we bring in new technologies, we bring in new exposures, new vulnerabilities, things we really haven't thought about. And it takes a little while, and we understand it after a while, and we begin to secure it. But our mindset needs to change. This is not the same as industrial technologies or new ways of doing aircraft or cars. These technologies are global, and they expose us globally, literally within milliseconds. So as long as we can grasp that and understand it, with that new mindset, we can encourage employees to use the new technologies, but we have to show them how to use them so we don't put the government's and our people's crown jewels at risk of being taken by our adversaries.
Thank you very much. I think it's interesting to point out that the intranet started in the Department of Defense not too many years ago. And of course, it grew into an internet, and now the global community uses the benefits of that internet and that way of communicating globally. We are stressing these days more and more open communications. We're more connected, and of course, then we have become, as a result, more productive. We would describe this perhaps as entering an age of interdependence, though. We have become very dependent on each other for our world economies and our national securities and our prosperity. With more of these connections, though, and some estimate that by next year we will have 2 billion individuals and users connected to the internet, we have become more vulnerable. And of course, the cyber criminals have found a new avenue for making money, and it's become syndicated now. And there's been an explosive growth of activity in cybercrime, as you're very well familiar. So with your first question about how the networks have changed, this is what we've seen. It's been exponential growth, exponential opportunity, but also the threats and vulnerabilities are very real.
Ms. Frantz.
I would just like to add a notion that, to echo my colleague's comment about technology being very exciting, very innovative, contributing to productivity, and our economic growth.
Can you pull your mic? Great.
Sorry about that. Our economic growth and prosperity, and our productivity, which retains our leadership in the global economy. However, new technology does provide challenges. And industry is responding in many ways. One, we talked a lot about technology and training. We talked about empowering the user to use these technologies more securely. In addition, industry is increasingly baking security into its products and services, and that is something that that we heard a lot about in recent weeks during the RSA conference in San Francisco in April, which is a great place to learn where some of these new technologies are going. I think with regard to the federal government, though, one thing they can do is look at their procurement strategies and see if they can't be nimbler in adapting to the adoption and of these new technologies, not only for the benefits that they bring, but the security aspects that they bring as well.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to the GAO, Mr. Wachuzin. Recently, you completed work looking at the information security controls and practices at both the Los Alamitos National Laboratory and the Tennessee Valley Authority. And can you cite some of the major information security control deficiencies in both studies? And are there similarities in the deficiencies of both entities? And what are the challenges for them? And if you feel this is information that we don't need to share, then we'll take it up in the classified section. But what can you tell us at this point?
Yeah, I can certainly address those issues, I think, at a high enough level where it won't be disruptive or compromise the security of those organizations. We've identified, as we do on most of our examinations of information security controls at agencies, a number of significant vulnerabilities at both the Los Alamos National Laboratory and at the TVA. With regard to the TVA, we looked at the security controls and the network security controls over its corporate network, as well as the network supporting the control systems that operate key infrastructures operated by the Tennessee Valley Authority. We found a number of vulnerabilities related to controls that were insufficient to adequately identify and validate the identity of users and in the access privileges granted to those users. We found weaknesses with regard to the firewalls that were in place at those organizations, which could allow certain firewalls to be either bypassed or not adequately segregate and prevent network traffic that should have occurred or that should not be passed through those devices. We also found a number of problems associated with their auditing and monitoring capabilities, and those are the controls in which agencies use to try to identify and detect and then respond to unauthorized traffic or security incidents. So we find pretty much weaknesses in most of the general control areas that we look at, and we found those at both Los Alamos and at TVA. And with respect to TVA, we found that not only the cybersecurity related weaknesses, but also physical security weaknesses as well. And combined with the cybersecurity weaknesses that we identified, placed the control systems networks and the control systems that we examined at risk to both internal and external threats.
Well, some have made the case that our military agencies have better technical and organizational capabilities for addressing cybersecurity in the federal government when compared with the multiple operational layers of DHS. And can you comment on whether DHS has adequate or similar capabilities for operational cybersecurity?
Okay. As you may know, back in 2003, President Bush issued the National Strategy to Secure Cyberspace. As part of that strategy, DHS was the focal point for much of the federal cybersecurity efforts. Over the past several years, GAO has identified and consistently reported that DHS has not consistently implemented and met those responsibilities. In total, we issued like about 30 recommendations in various different core elements related to protecting cybersecurity. And as a result, we've found that DHS has just not adequately performed their responsibilities for a number of different reasons, including not the least of which is the significant turnover in their leadership and key personnel positions in their cybersecurity area.
Thank you. I just thought the agency was too big, and putting them all under one roof, and when you have had the experience of being the master of your unit and now you have to report to someone else, it just wasn't going to work out all that efficiently. But let me hear from the others of you.
Well, we can go down the line if that's okay.
Yeah, we'll just go down the
Yeah.
line.
You know, this is a serious problem, and it's not going to be easy to fix. We'd all prefer that it was a civilian agency. Everyone thought it should be DHS, but as my colleagues have said, they are not yet capable of performing the mission. And so one of the questions you want to ask is, well, how long do you want to wait? Depending on who you talk to, they say, well, DHS could be ready in 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. We can't wait 3 or 5 years. The dilemma is the only place that really has the capability now is the Department of Defense, and particularly the National Security Agency. But when you say that, you immediately trigger constitutional concerns. You trigger the memory of the FISA debate. We have a problem. The people who could do this best are in the intelligence community, but we're not comfortable with that. The people who would be the civilian focal point for this aren't ready or capable. So how do we fix that problem? That's a very difficult issue, and it's one I think we're going to have to wrestle with for the next couple of years.
Sachs.
Helps to turn mine
You can
on
just
also.
jump in.
I just jumped right in, thank you. Have to have this green light here. As one of the guys that was there when we opened the doors for DHS, we were in the spring and summer of 2003, we had a lot of euphoria about what we could do. We had this beautiful charter in front of us and the pasture was green. We look back on those days now and I see Mr. Lewis chuckling. Summer of '03 was when the blaster worm hit. There were outages in the power sector. I'm sure we all recall that. When the agency was young and didn't have a lot of, or still maybe should have a lot of naivety about it, we did quite well because we didn't know what we couldn't do or what we weren't supposed to do. Unfortunately, in my opinion, what's happened over the years is the agency has been unable to grow in the manner that we were hoping that it would. It's been unable to take on the challenges and the responsibilities that we hoped it would. There's been a lot of politics surrounding them, as you're aware. There's been a lot of media scrutiny. There's been a lot of private sector scrutiny, international scrutiny. DHS is very big. It encompasses parts of 24 different federal agencies that were pulled together. There's a culture that has to be stitched in. And underlying all of this, of course, is cyberspace, this thing that we're all very familiar with, and they have the role of making it secure. I don't envy my counterparts at DHS. This is a tough mission that they have in front of them. They've got very good people that are there, but they are constrained by a lot of things that are beyond their control. And I think one of the best things we could do is really get out of their way and let them, particularly in cyberspace, let them do what they need to do. Give them the latitude, the ability to grow, the ability to hire the right people, and let those people run. Give them the pasture and let them do what they need to do. I believe the private sector is more than willing to work with DHS. Many of us do spend our days over at the department. We've got some very strong public-private bonds that have been built over the years. We all do want to make this work. Key to all this is leadership. We need to get some good appointments. We need to get strong people who are dedicated in service to their country and are willing to be there year after year, and people that we in industry are willing to work with. I think we can do that. I have a lot of optimism for the department, and I do look forward to, in the next coming years or so, seeing big changes there. But just to go back to the military, because I spent 20 years there, the military has a very old culture, and we have to recognize that. It's been around over 200 years. DHS is only 6 years old, and we cannot expect DHS to perform like a 200-year-old department. It's just not there yet. So patience, I beg of you. We'll get there with them.
Madam Chair, I come from a military background, as you noted earlier, having spent 35 years on active duty, and I was serving during the time in 1998 when it came clear that in the Department of Defense we recognized the fact that our computers were being attacked. So the responsibility was given to the United States Space Command at that time to create some sort of a program to defend our computer networks. And I was privileged to serve at that time within United States Space Command. And the program we put together in 1998 has grown over the years to now what is considered by many to be a very outstanding program. The Department of Defense also has the benefit of a command and control system and network where individuals work for each person and you know exactly who you work for, and there are orders that can be given and they have to be followed based on the requirements of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. That's what the command and control of the Department of Defense is all about. Our other organizations, though, don't have that kind of a structure. And I would point out that in my years now, over a decade of working with this area that initially was called computer network defense and now has gone into cybersecurity type of terminology, that there are a number of departments in our federal government that have key roles in this. And I would just point out the fact that Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Defense, the intelligence community, the Department of State, the Department of Commerce, Department of Justice, Department of Interior, just to mention a few, that have key roles in a national strategy for securing cyberspace. And I believe it's for that reason and the realization that someone had to be in control of that and have some sort of oversight. And for that reason, I was proud to serve with our Center for Strategic and International Studies Cybersecurity Commission and recommend that we consider an individual in the White House that would have the opportunity to create policy and to provide oversight and a balanced federal program across all the federal departments and agencies. We feel like that is a critical way to have someone in charge to move us forward in this critical area.
Thank you. Ms. France?
Thank you. I don't have much to add to the very good comments of my fellow witnesses, except probably to put things in slightly in perspective with regard to the relationship between DHS and DoD. We should remember that DHS had very limited resources, both from a staffing perspective and from a funding perspective in its early days. And since the beginning, it has leveraged the manpower of DoD and the systems and strategies that had been used in DoD. So that has been a positive impact, I would say. But it does need to be its own entity. It has a different mission. It has a different perimeter and parameters than the Department of Defense has. So it does need to build its own manpower, and importantly as well, it really needs its own facilities that provide it a base of operations. That has been a challenge since the very beginning. It was a challenge when I was there in the National Cybersecurity Division, and it remains a challenge today. DoD has a more impressive facility and a capable one, and that should be no surprise given the funding differences between the two. So resources, manpower, and facilities are really key to making some improvements soon.
I want to go back to Mr. Lewis again, and I think the other panelists have been addressing this issue, but as part of the CNCI, there's an ongoing debate as to what role the DHS ought to have as a leading agency charged to coordinate and respond to cyber-relating incidents. And I wish they would have been here today to answer these questions. But do you think, and I think many of you have commented on it already, but does EHS have the technical or operational capabilities to be in charge of handling cyber?
Well, you've heard some of the answer earlier. They have a really good team there now. There's some really good folks. They have a really good team there now. They have some really good folks, and that's an improvement. They do have a shortage of resources, facilities, trained folks, money. Hard to believe after all these years, but they are not equipped. And I was talking to someone who was over at the DHS Cyber Division last week, and they said the staffing is running at about 30%. So for every one person who's there, there's two who are missing. I don't know if that's right. This is what I was told, but I have heard repeatedly from many people that severe resource problems put them at a disadvantage. They don't have the trained people. Now, they do have a very important mission. The NCSD, the National Cybersecurity Division, should be the place responsible for securing the .gov networks. It has to work with critical infrastructure. It has to work with the private sector. That's enough, particularly when they aren't staffed or funded. They don't need to pick up more missions, but the missions they have are really important, and we should hopefully make them capable of carrying them out. As I say, though, a great team there now, probably the best team they've had in a long time. So there's a chance.
There's hope.
Yeah.
I want to go to you, Mr. Sachs, and from your government experience, which dates back to the Clinton administration's 1998 presidential directive for securing critical infrastructure sectors, what are the so-called lessons learned that the federal government has improved upon over the past decade? And conversely, where are we not learning? Now, what are we not learning from our mistakes?
So in the mid-1990s, the concern was one of the critical infrastructures. We saw .com growing. We knew that Russian bank robbers were breaking in. The Air Force had intrusions at Rome Labs. There was this understanding that the internet, while great, was offering these new problems that we really didn't know how to get our hands around. The bombing of Oklahoma City in 1995 was the big eye-opener. Not only were children and people killed there, but we had quite a few government computer systems in that building that were destroyed when that bomb went off. We found within minutes that several government departments, their databases literally weren't there. They had chosen that building because they thought physically it was in the middle of nowhere. Nobody was going to attack it. It's far, far away from Washington and New York City and places that terrorists would go after. And they realized that this linkage between physical and cyber was more than just science fiction. It really did exist. And a terrorist attack doing something physical could have an effect in cyberspace. So that set forth a series of congressional hearings, White House investigations, DOD, others got involved. There was an exercise in 1997, highly classified at the time, but today we can read all about it, called Eligible Receiver, that showed that portions of the Defense Department's networks could be reached from the civilian networks from home. Literally, I could dial into the internet and gain access to classified computers, and we were that porous back in the 1990s. So a lot has come since then, a big recognition. As General Radegui mentioned, the JTF-C&D was created in '98 as part of that. I was part of that group also that stood that up. We immediately took upon ourselves to secure the Defense Department, not North American cyberspace. This wasn't like a NORAD for the internet. But even just looking at DOD, we found we were extremely porous. We had websites that listed flight schedules for generals. We had websites that showed full bunker maps of all the nuclear facilities. I mean, it was unbelievable what information we were making available to our adversaries. And that was on unclassified websites, not even talking about access to what we thought was classified. So since then, I think the big lesson that's been learned is that information seeks to be free. Under its own, if you put information somewhere, you put it on a hard drive, and doggone it, it will attempt, even almost on its own, to leak out. But we make it easy. We connect sensitive computers to the wide open internet. We allow our employees to swap files back and forth. We don't train them. We don't teach our employees, both private sector as well as government, the danger of cross connections, the actual information, those ones and zeros that are on hard drives, how much risk that can put our nation against. Our adversaries, on the other hand, understand this game fully. The Chinese in the late 1990s published their doctrine of unrestricted warfare. Many of us read it, looked at it, and said, yep, they got it, they understand it. We looked at ourselves, and our doctrines and policies didn't even come close. In our arrogance, because we invented the internet, everything speaks English online, we're thinking, oh, this is ours, we can control it, but they understood it. And we are seeing this today. This has now come back around to bite us. So our challenge going forward, we look back at the 1990s, we look at this decade as it comes to an end here in a few months. We've learned so much about cybercrime, cyber espionage, military actions online, and even just what people want to do. What does society want to do with the networks? So as we go forward, 2010 and the years beyond, the internet doesn't go away, cyberspace doesn't go away, it's really just part of what we are. I think the federal government, in a partnership with the private sector and with America, has got to face this challenge head on. We take the internet as what it is. It is an economic engine. It's the fuel for recovery. It's exactly what we need to stimulate us, to use some of the terms that have been used here. We must protect it. We must guard it as like that and think about it economically. Otherwise, we lose, and we lose big, because our adversaries, again, they understand this game, and they are able to think in front of us.
Let me get to General Radegui. And it seems to me, and I think we've all mentioned this, that the federal government has too many cooks in the kitchen for cyber coordination organization. This is a fair assessment. I think all of you have been saying that. Okay, and as the former head of DISA, could you offer up some thoughts on where the government could improve its organizational hierarchy for cybersecurity across the entire agency community?
Madam Chair, as I mentioned, I think we need to have someone at the top of this hierarchy of our nation that can give the proper guidance and policy, the proper oversight, and can lead from the top in putting together a comprehensive approach to addressing cyberspace and what it means to us in our future. You know, I also wanted to comment on the fact that this doesn't require cyber science. Also, it boils down a lot also to management techniques and policies. For example, a lot of computers are broken into through electronic means, but we also don't have the proper governance and the proper policies and procedures in managing our capabilities when people steal laptops from our vehicles, steal them from our cars, or that we just lose our computer capabilities. So a lot of this also boils down to policies and procedures of managing the capabilities, because in many cases we are just too careless with our cyber equipment. And so I would state that as something that we need to develop additional governance around and better procedures. And this gets back to the part about the education and awareness and developing a cyber mindset. We just don't realize how vulnerable we are to just someone picking and choosing the computers that we allow access to on a normal basis, on a daily basis. I can tell you that the organization that I'm with now in civilian life stresses this with every employee all the time. So now when I travel, I think twice when I'm in my hotel room. I never leave my hotel room and allow my computer to stay there. As a matter of fact, I don't even lock it in those little safes they provide. I carry that computer around with me on my person at all times, because the organization I'm with, our name is our reputation. And to lose a computer to someone who steals it would be devastating to our business opportunity. So it's something that we have stressed in our education process.
Yeah, let me just say, do you have a backup? Could you put a chip in there so you will know, it will signal you wherever it is? And would you not have a backup to what you have in your computer?
I have backup to what's in my computer, but I want to make sure that unauthorized individuals don't gain access to my computer and the networks that I'm authorized to operate in.
Well, couldn't a chip signal you some way that it's out of your control, your computer is not within your, with you? Could it signal you and you could turn it off or destroy what's on there or black it out? It seems that we have technology that would work that way.
We have a lot of technology, and a lot of technology could be put into place that would have that kind of a capability, but most individuals, I don't think, operate in that fashion today. So it's a very manual process of controlling the asset that's in your possession.
Okay, and let's go to Ms. France now. And there seems to be a significant amount of resistance from industry regarding policy proposals that would establish standards for information security controls and software assurance for government systems. And can you explain this to me, why there is this resistance?
Certainly. I think that I'm not sure I would characterize it as a resistance from the industry to discuss the kinds of things that may be needed to address specific issues, specific problems. As I mentioned in my remarks, the industry is involved in standard-making processes in international standards-making bodies, and they see a benefit to standards for both interoperability and for security concerns. I think the issue is around proposals that may come that are trying to address some of the problems, but don't do so either in a targeted way or in a consultative way with industry, the way that we see it happen in those exchanges in the international standard-making bodies, for example. So I wouldn't say it's a resistance to identifying clear needs and then taking steps in a partnership fashion, in a consultative fashion, to find out the best way to address those needs, because there can always be unintended consequences from either regulation or standards or, dare I say, even legislation that may have a broad brush and not address the concern specifically and have unintended consequences for the impact on industry and consumers and government users, for example.
I would like to have each one of you give us one concluding statement that you feel will help us. We are going to be making recommendations. We might have a bill. We might just make some strong recommendations to the executive branch. But what would your last input be that you think would be helpful? Let's start with the GAO.
I think I would suggest that you assure that in your bill you establish the mechanisms to...
Would you talk a little louder in the microphone?
Sure.
Thank you.
I would suggest that in your bill that you include mechanisms for establishing accountability over the actions that agencies need to take, and assure that they are held to task to implement those particular requirements, whatever you may include in your bill. I think accountability is key, and that would be my one remark.
Okay. Ms. Lewis?
Thank you. I'd say we need to come up with a plan. We need to put the White House in charge of that plan, and we need to get moving on it. We've been doing this now for 10 years, and we're worse than when we started. On the accountability note, I think one thing that Congress can do, and one thing that legislation can certainly do, is you have the authority and the oversight responsibility to hold government and the private sector accountable for when there are lapses. And there certainly have been enough lapses in the last few years.
I'd like to also highlight the people. I think this is the real angle that could make a very good nucleus of anything in the future. There's three groups that really make all this work. There's government officials and people who work within the government. They know each other. They're very professional. There's the private sector, those, and I'm talking about the private sector that is profit-oriented, that do the work, they run the carriers and so forth. Then there's this third group of volunteers, they're the unsung heroes, the ones that collaborate. This Conficker worm that was going around recently largely was solved by a volunteer effort that's come together. There was no formal approach towards that leadership, and we've seen this over the years that this type of problem solving tends to just come out of nowhere by the volunteers. So very important, those three groups. But I highlight that because of the people piece. In cybersecurity, the professionals like myself and the rest of the panel here who do what we do, we still need to have our profession professionalized. You'll see this called forth in the CSIS report. I believe Senator Rockefeller has it in his bill. The notion that says that those who are professional in this world need to become professional. We need to be certified. We need to be licensed. It's more than just passing an exam, but actually licensed and bonded. We do this with real estate salespeople. We do it with people who groom dogs. We do it with lawyers and countless other professions. Right now, the essence of our nation, trillions of dollars of value, is being managed by very good people, but we don't have a licensing or licensed profession. We don't solve that overnight. This may take years. The profession needs to do it ourselves. But it would be helpful if the Congress would think about how can we enable that? How do we help the profession become professional?
Thanks for that input. General?
Madam Chair, I would say for one point that's different than those already expressed, I would stress the fact that if we could significantly improve federal cybersecurity by operationalizing the intent of the FISMA legislation, and by doing that also using performance-based measurements for security, so that we really are measuring the operation of security throughout our federal networks instead of just an audit of the checklist.
Thank you. And Ms. France?
I think I'd like to respond to your comment about too many cooks in the kitchen. I wouldn't want to leave the impression that we have too many people working on cybersecurity these days, because I don't think any of us would agree that is the case. However, we don't have a head chef. Let's create a head chef. Let's empower the cooks in each of the agencies or their kitchens to do their job. Let's give them empowerment before we measure them. And then let's look at making changes that enable rather than prohibit the partnership to really operate the way that it could in a shared environment.
I think I've heard over and over, General, is you need somebody to head up the Joint Chiefs of Staff, right? I think your input has been very, very valuable to us, and we have it all recorded. We have your reports. We'll be reaching out to you again. And with your statements, we're going to adjourn this meeting, but we'll be back in touch. Thank you so much for your testimony. Meeting is adjourned.